how you speak. And the other people in the channel will hear you and the interpreter at the same volume. Ahora voy a dar unas pautas finales de inglés-español solamente y mi cointérprete las transmitirá en inglés simultáneamente. Bueno, solo les recuerdo que hablen despacio, pausado, para darle oportunidad a los intérpretes a que puedan traducir lo que están diciendo. So I'm just reminding everyone to speak slowly and clearly so that our interpreters can interpret for you and everyone can understand. Bueno, yo creo que ya.
Listo. Bueno, yo estaré hablando en español. No sé, ya veo. Bueno, voy a cambiarme a español.
So I will be speaking Spanish. And today, welcome everyone. Today, we will be talking about the mining violence in the municipality of Copan in Honduras. This comes with the actions of the United States-based mining company Ahora Minerals. Since 2009, this company has violated human rights of the indigenous community of Mayan Chortí, of the surrounding villages. And above a year ago, Ahora Minerals destroyed a cemetery that was over 200 years old with the complicity of state officials of Honduras. In this moment, there is a project to expand the mine that threatens to forcibly displace this indigenous community of Azacualpa. It also threatens to contaminate the communities of Azacualpa and La Ceibita and other towns and populations nearby. It also threatens the authority of indigenous peoples. Despite these human rights violations that are documented by many reports and legal actions, the US-based refineries continue to buy gold from this mine. To speak on this situation and the actions that are being taken to denounce these extractive activities, we have the participation of a number of Honduran and international organizations. To begin our panel, we have Pedro Mejia and Víctor Fernández, who are lawyers from Bufete de Estudios para la Justicia y la Dignidad, and have been working and fighting with the community since 2018. They have also been in charge of legal litigation on behalf of the leaders of the Mayan Chortí community at the national level. They're going to speak on this case and the current status of today. And I don't know if I should introduce people as they speak or in the order that they will be speaking. So maybe we'll just leave it like that. So Pedro or Victor, I don't know if you can begin to start with your presentation to share these legal cases that have been ongoing in the Azacualpa community.
Pedro, no te escuchamos. No te escuchamos, no sé si.
Hola, Yariré.
Hola, Yariré.
Sí, ahora ya.
De acuerdo. Sí, muy buenas tardes, Yariré. Perdón por el problema de sonido. Buenas tardes también a las personas con las cuales comparto panel y a las personas que se encuentran también en este webinar y también las personas que nos siguen por las redes sociales. una consulta, va a ser posible compartir una presentación que envié, o si no, inicio de una vez. Bueno, no hay problema, yo puedo iniciar de una vez. Y bueno, iniciaría comentando en relación al foro, y haría mención sobre todo en un primer inicio en que esta empresa minera que ejerce violencia en contra de la comunidad Maya Chortí de Azacualpa, pues es una transnacional que tiene su domicilio en las Islas Vírgenes Británicas, que es, digamos, de común conocimiento que las Islas Vírgenes Británicas se constituyen como un paraíso fiscal en el cual le permite a las empresas de este tipo, pues, menores mecanismos de control sobre sus actividades. Y además esta empresa, Aura Minerals, tiene sede administrativa en Miami, Florida, Estados Unidos, y opera en Honduras bajo la filial Minerales de Occidente. En ese sentido, pues, este es un poco el mapeo de esta empresa minera transnacional. Y ahora haría referencia a Aura Minerals y en el sentido de por qué incluso el nombre de este foro se llama pues Sin Fronteras contra la Violencia, y que hacemos particularmente hincapié en el concepto de violencia que nosotros llamamos a la actividad que ejerce esta transnacional como violencia y no como conflicto minero, lo que existe en la comunidad Mayan Chortí de Azacualpa. Y es particularmente por la disparidad entre las posiciones en que se encuentra, por un lado la comunidad Mayan Chortí, los luchadores y las luchadoras Mayan Chortí de Azacualpa, y por otro lado el poder de ejercer violencia, el poder económico, el poder de influencia política que tiene la empresa Aura Minerals, que lo que provoca al haber un encuentro entre las posiciones, digamos, entre la comunidad Mayan Chortí y la transnacional minera, pues es, sin lugar a dudas, pues un aplastamiento en muchas ocasiones.
You know, it's a squashing of an exercise, you know, it's an exercise of violence. In many occasions, the communities can only resist with their bodies without having other defense mechanisms or institutions to control what the mining company is doing. And so this power disparity, this superpower that these transnational mining companies has, and in particular Aura Minerals, it can be explained with a number of events that have happened in the country. So I want to mention a few important events, because the power that Aura Minerals has in Honduras can be explained in 5 events. Aura Minerals has enough power to ignore Supreme Court rulings. Supreme Court of Honduras is the supreme organ in Honduras that directs the direction of justice in our country. So how to understand that Aura Minerals has enough power that's above the Supreme Court of Justice. In 2019, that was accompanied by Movimiento Amplio and other human rights organizations, were able to bring this case to the Supreme Court, which recognized the community of Azacualpa as Mayan Chortí. And on top of identifying their indigenous identity, they identified that the cemetery of Azacualpa was cultural patrimony of these indigenous peoples. And thus, you cannot exhumate those bodies or excavate those bodies and that the state had to do anything as in its power to protect the cemetery. And that was dictated by the Supreme Court. That was in 2019. However, in October of 2020, Aura Mineros, with the mayor of La Unión, Copan, they ask a judge in a lower court to the company to excavate the entirety of the cemetery. And this judge authorizes illegally, which was contradictory to the Supreme Court ruling, which allows them to exhumate and excavate all the bodies and remains in the cemetery. And they order the Secretary of Defense of Honduras to militarize the zone to avoid social and community leaders to resist and prevent that their loved ones, the remains of their loved ones, be destroyed. This is the first event which shows the superpower that this company has above the state of Honduras, which can ignore Supreme Court rulings. And this is not the only event. Also, Aura Minerals has the power to revert or stop executive orders by the presidency. And last year, there was a new government, and President Xiomara Castro, in her inaugural address, announced to eradicate open pit mining. And her Minister of Natural Resources and the Environment, with a public announcement, announced there would be a closure of open pit mining. And following the orders of the presidency. But that same week, all the media apparatus and corporate media, traditional media, were co-opted by this company, Aura Minerals, and the news were centered around how dangerous and damaging
clausurar la minería a cielo abierto. Estamos arribando a febrero del 2023 y la minería a cielo abierto en Honduras continúa vigente. Y estas empresas, tanto Aura Minerals como otras empresas mineras que funcionan a cielo abierto en el país, continúan teniendo vigencia. Además, esta transnacional Aura Minerals también tiene diputados del Congreso Nacional como gestores propios. Particularmente se menciona al diputado Javier.
They mentioned Javier Trigueros, which at the time that they announced the seizure of gold mining, they defended the posture of the mining company, announcing that in the municipality of La Unión Copal, that the community that they represent is in favor of mining interests. In all these moments, you can see how this mining company has enough power to influence decisions and can do its bidding in the three branches of the Honduran government: the judicial, the legislative, and the executive branch. And Aura Minerals, throughout its history, has had the public ministry serving as its personal lawyer. The public ministry is the entity in charge of prosecuting those who have committed crimes in our country.
toda esta trama de Aura Minerals en el país, se ratifica o se figura mediante tres aspectos. El Ministerio Público ha criminalizado 19 luchadores sociales por el delito de daños agravados en el año 2020. Este es un primer evento. También en el año 2021 criminaliza otros 15 luchadores y luchadoras acusándoles del delito de usurpación, cuando en realidad estaban protestando y no queriendo adueñarse de la propiedad de la transnacional minera. Y en total, digamos, son alrededor de casi 40 personas que ha criminalizado el Ministerio Público en defensa de los intereses de la transnacional minera. Y por otro lado, el Ministerio Público ha recibido mínimo 5 denuncias interpuestas por la comunidad de Azacualpa, denunciando actos de corrupción, destrucción del medio ambiente, persecución y hostigamiento en contra de la comunidad de Azacualpa, y en ninguna de esas denuncias el Ministerio Público siquiera ha presentado un requerimiento fiscal, es decir, las denuncias están archivadas o no se investigan. Y finalmente,
And finally, this company, Aura Minerals, is also characterizes itself by stealing wealth from the country of Honduras and from the Mayan Chortí community. And there's two facts that I want to share when it comes to the plunder of these resources. The activities that this company has in Honduras generates between 100 and 150 million dollars as profit. Between 100 and 150 million dollars annually in profits. And in exchange of these resources, these profits that Aura Minerals generates, what they leave to the community, according to a report of the mining agencies in Honduras, during 2020, they only hire 555 jobs. 575 people they employ. And in exchange of that, they take between 100 and 150 million dollars annually, just in profits. So these figures, what they show is that the transnational company, Aura Minerals, has had power and influence in all three branches of government in Honduras, and has been able to undermine executive orders by the presidency and rulings by the Supreme Court. And they undermine the very institutions that are there to protect and guarantee the rights of Honduras. And on top of that, they can take $100 million from the Mayan Chortí community and providing less than 600 jobs, direct jobs to the community. This community remains subsumed in poverty, and these are some of the things that this company practices, the same as many other mining companies in the region, and this is violence, pure violence. And I wanted to close with some of these findings, and I would close and I would stop there. Thank you, Jalile. Thank you, Pedro, for explaining and contextualizing the situation that is being lived in Azacualpa, not just in this past government, but in the current government, where there's been promises but are not fulfilled. So I think for all of us and all the people who are joining us today, it's very clear what's happening in Azacualpa is impunity, corruption, and violence. So right now, we, Jessica Rodriguez will be speaking. She is an indigenous leader. And she's part of a committee of those affected by Minosa. And Minosa, let's remember, is a subsidiary of Ahora Minerals in Honduras. And she's going to share some of her experiences.
Y están clamando justicia y pues no.
And so this community is calling for justice, and the government, unfortunately.
And so they're looking for justice, but it has not been happening. So maybe Jessica can start to share with us. Thank you very much.
Hola.
Hello.
Creo que no puedo encender la cámara.
I'm having trouble turning on my camera. That's okay. Don't worry. We're hearing you. Okay.
Bueno, soy Jessica Rodríguez.
I'm Jessica Rodriguez. Good evening.
Creo que lo que estaba diciendo el abogado Pedro.
I think what Pedro was saying
Las violaciones
about the violations that have happened of the Mayan Chortí people. We started a committee. We're organized now. And we are organized by states. And I say by states because all of us as a community will always say that the company is a monster for all of us because they have violated our rights. They have usurped our dignity. And they've done to us whatever they wanted to. About the case of the cemetery, in January, the 20th of January of 22, we had the impact of receiving the news that they had militarized the entrance to the cemetery, the entrance, so that they would be able to exhume the bodies of our relatives without our permission. And we, as defenders, we came down to go. We went to a place where we could look down what they were doing. We couldn't go in because at that time, Juan Orlando Hernandez was still president, and they prohibited our entrance. But we saw how there was trucks going up, and we wanted to go in to see what they were doing, but unfortunately we were not allowed to enter. And only afterwards we saw the destruction. And what they did, they said they were exhuming bodies in the cemetery, but they did not exhume them. What they did was they took them to get rid of them, to throw them in a dump where we don't know their whereabouts. And also, that's what we're asking, that to be justice. And as we said, it's been a year now that she's been governing this country, and she hasn't done anything about the open air mining that she said she would in her inauguration speech. And for us, it's something very complicated because we don't know where the remains of our relatives are, and we see that the government doesn't do anything to bring justice. And so this is what happened. They militarized our graveyard, which was more than 200 years of knowing our community, of being ours, of being part of our patrimony, where our great-grandfathers, great-great-grandfathers were buried, our uncles, and to know that we don't have a place anymore where we can go and converse with our relatives, maybe pray for their souls. And also the destruction of the environment. They make a total destruction where they're taking down forests, contaminating the water. And in our community, there are more than 200 areas where we could get water, but they have disappeared because of the over 200 contaminants that the company uses. And this contaminates the nature. It affects our land. Also, the explosions that they make, this affects our community, our health, because of the dust that comes out from those destinations. It falls on each of us, and this is where we get sick. The fact that children, when they hear these explosions, they are afraid because they think something's going to happen. Our homes are cracked. The machine sounds at night. Some of the older people, they cannot sleep because the company is very close to our community. And as far as how it affects the environment, I think not only Azacualpa is affected, but other communities because of the chemicals that the company uses, cyanide and other chemicals that they use to extract gold. They discharge them into the rivers, and the river in the majority of the cities of Santa Rosa, it consumes water from there, and the river is contaminated, and there are times when it goes straight into the open sea. And we know we're not the ones that are only ones that are being contaminated, several other people, but perhaps they're not aware of it, or maybe they are aware, but they don't say anything because they don't want to hurt the company. Because according to the company, it is a responsible company, but we can affirm the contrary, that they are violent towards us, they violate our rights, they threaten our people, those of us, especially who are in the struggle, they threaten us. For example, if we were to make a movement to try to have justice, well, they will say to us, if something happens and they fire the workers because of us, they're telling the workers so that they can threaten us. And they say if the employees are fired, then it'll be your fault. And so it is harassment towards each and every one of us because they're trying to prevent us from defending what is ours. And as the attorney Pedro said, they take our riches in exchange for nothing because our community is poor, basically. As a matter of fact, this year, when school's about to start, there's no teachers to do classes because they say if the mine doesn't pay for the teachers, well, there won't be any classes because the government does not want to become responsible. But this is false because the local municipality, the mayor, they're in favor of the company and do everything to fool the community. And there's also threats to displace our community because those who know Azacualpa, they know that they're working below, but above that is our community. And there are strong explosions, and that goes up. So there's times when we're in our community and according to them, they're going to displace us. As they've done before, they displaced the people in San Andres, and the people did whatever they wanted to do. They violated those people's rights, and I think that they want to do the same thing with Azacualpa, to continue to violate our rights and to play with us as people. And this is what we do not want, not for them, and not to continue violating our rights, that we might someday have justice for what they did to our graveyard, because now we have no place to pray to our deceased. And with the explosions, well, and more than anything, the displacement of our community, because I think that nobody would want is our community is fine, and maybe someday tomorrow we'll have to look to see where we're going to exist, where we can have a home. And I think the company, that's what they want. But what we want is there to be justice, and so that the new president, which a year ago took control of this country, well, that she do and take actions of what she said in her speech. No more open air mining, because the most affected are those of us who are next to the community, the ones who are living in their own bodies, and to be squished, and for them to take away our rights. I think that's it.
Muchísimas gracias, compañera Jessica. También, ¿verdad? Quiero
Thank you very much, Jessica. I also want to thank you for your being with us, but also for your time. And because I know that talking about the suffering that you have lived is not easy. So thank you very much for describing to us, for telling us what it feels like in your body to live these experiences, because as you said before, and as you will, and you see how the company has violated the human rights, your human rights, and the other compañeros, compañeras in Azacualpa. And I believe that with what we just heard from Jessica, this talk that they are responsible, that is a lie. They're selling their gold with this under this guise, with this phrase that we are responsible. And we see that this take the mask off, and we see this is not true. So now we're going to have an event. Well, we're going to have from the international region by Allison and Jim Moore, Allison Lira, who is the director of human rights in Honduras for Witness for Peace. And Jim Moore is the associate fellow, public policies for more than 10 years. We have been struggling in Canada.
2018 coordinó el programa de América
The
Latina en
coordinated
Mining Watch
program
Canadá.
Latin America.
Primero
And
va a
first,
hablar Allison, y luego
Alice is going to speak to us.
nuestra compañera Jen va a compartir con nosotros.
And
Hi, everyone. Thanks for being here. Thanks for having an interest in this case. As Pedro, one of the community lawyers, and Jessica, one of the directly affected peoples from Azacualpa, We're talking about this mine since it started operating in Honduras in 2009, has largely operated with outright and like very clear impunity. Their activities are largely supported by regional actors that conspire to subvert the institutionality and the laws of Honduras to allow the mine to expand without regard for environmental regulation, the well-being of surrounding communities. And that has been really clear since even before Auto Minerals took on the San Andres mine in Azacualpa. Previous international mining companies, largely Canadian-based, have often operated with this kind of culture. Destruction of cemeteries. The destruction of the cemetery last year is not new. It's the third cemetery to be destroyed in the last couple of decades that the mine has operated. And so when we were looking at accompanying the communities and understanding our mandate as kind of international observers, it was really important for us to kind of trace the links that the company has outside of the country, because that's a lot of where the power and the influence comes from, especially given that the profits that are made from the mine are largely going outwards, right? So Auto Minerals is used to be a Canadian company and is now truly a transnational one, in that they're headquartered in Miami, they're registered in the British Virgin Islands, and they trade in the Toronto and the Brazilian stock exchanges. So what that means is the profits that come at the cost of the human well-being of the communities, of the surrounding communities, and the environment and the water sources and all the rest, are largely benefiting societies that are not the Honduran society. And they're largely benefiting the Brazilian family that owns or at least has controlling interest in Auto Minerals. I mean, I think there's like a couple points that I'd like to make related to the ways that Auto Minerals kind of operates on an international perspective. One of the things that we noticed when we started looking to the company, is that the gold that is extracted from the San Andres mine gets sold to US companies. One is a company called Azacualpa Refining, which is owned by a Japanese company that has a subsidiary in the US. They have 2 refineries, one in Salt Lake City and one in Miami. And the other one is Automa International, which is a New Jersey-based refinery. Both companies have a long history of buying gold from the San Andres mine, specifically from Auto Minerals. And the thing that's highly concerning about this is that with Azacualpa Refining USA, which is it's a subsidiary of the Japanese company, is that Azacualpa is a company that supposedly prides itself on holding high corporate standards related to human rights and corporate responsibility. They're certified by some of the most rigorous and well-recognized responsible mining mechanisms. And when you read the LBMA's audit report, for example, which is one of the folks that certifies this company as a responsible mining adjacent company, is that Azacualpa does have a rather well-developed monitoring system, in that, they do a review of all their clients. They have kind of alerts for whatever kind of media comes out on their clients. They do regular reviews of their clients, and they've held a longstanding relationship with Auto Minerals. It's suspected that they've had a relationship since at least 2015. And the struggle that led up to the destruction of the cemetery in Azacualpa was years in the making. The case went to the Supreme Court. Communities held multiple protests. it's not like the companies, the refineries didn't know. And it's highly, highly concerning when responsible mining certification organizations certify companies based on their monitoring mechanisms and not on the ways those monitoring mechanisms are used. Because what's clear with Acai is that their monitoring of their clients is only so that they can cover their tracks better. It has nothing to do with actually holding high standards for human rights, because if they did, they would not have a relationship with outer minerals, and yet they do. So it tells us something really important about the greenwashing that is happening, not just with mining, but with a lot of different things. And it's concerning because the trends indicate that it's going to continue. The Biden administration, for example, is on this renewable energy revolution, and the reports that are coming out of their plans for getting the United States to lower its carbon emissions has nothing to do with lowering consumption, which is really what it would mean to have a relationship with the earth that is more sustainable. It's about creating renewable energies, and that includes the expansion of mines across the world to extract more precious minerals that can go into all the technology that is implied in the kind of renewable energy revolution. So it's like very clear that countries like the United States, but not just the United States, have a very clear vested interest in the expansion of these kinds of mines. And we expect that part of that is going to be the continued legitimization of companies like Outer Minerals, of companies like Acai, with these greenwashing, responsible mining kind of mechanisms. And so it's this case, it's a very specific case. It's a case worth paying attention to. It's a case worth being in solidarity with, but it's also important to understand that the pattern that we're seeing here is a pattern that we're seeing in mining struggles across the region and across the world. Yes, I am going to wrap up soon. I would just like to acknowledge the moment that we're in. It's been kind of heavy on my heart, the amount of killings that have happened in the last month all over the world. Here in Honduras, there's been 4 murders in the Bajo One related to the campesino land struggle. In Palestine, 9 Palestinians were killed in the West Bank by Israeli security forces. In the US, Tyree Nichols was beaten to death by police in Memphis. And a few weeks ago, Tortuguita, Manuel Baez from Atlanta was also killed by police protesting the construction of a new police facility. So what that indicates to me, how it connects to Azacualpa, is that we're all living very similar contexts of militarization, of repression, of extraction, of dispossession. And it's really important that we take the time to understand these cases, to understand how they connect, to understand how we can build strategies that that produce better results for everyone. And that's me. Thanks, everybody.
Gracias, Alison, por tu participación. Y como bien
Thanks,
dijiste,
Alison, for sharing your thoughts, your participation. As you mentioned, these killings is really a difficult moment, not just because of the quantity of killings against human and environmental rights defenders beyond Honduras, places like Palestine and the United States, and which is in the US, it's true that police brutality is a real issue. So thank you for highlighting that and bringing these cases into context in this international context,
Very much.
which these struggles are
These struggles are
connected,
all connected.
and in
We
any
need to have
we
some
need to
strategies
find
to
these
counteract
strategies
this
to
violence
counter this violence
and to bet
and
on
try and
a
build a
better
better future.
future.
So now we have
We now have
the participation of Jen Moore.
participation.
Jen Moore, I don't know if
I
you
don't know.
can
if you
begin.
Start now.
Sí, muchas gracias, Candide. Y también
Yes,
Yes,
very much.
thank you.
Pedro y Jessica.
Thank you,
Pedro,
Pedro, Jessica, and
Em,
Allison for your
for-
reflections.
solidarizarnos desde el Instituto de
And
Estudios
and
Políticos.
we want to send our solidarity
Bueno,
from
connect us
IPS
with being
to,
affected by the
show our solidarity with the Committee of Victims of Minosa
short run
and their struggle
happening.
that they are leading.
Como dices, Jessica, o sea,
And as you say, Jessica,
And like you said,
this
about
monster,
que pisa fuerte
this
this is a
monster that
steps very
hits hard, like
quickly.
the
has a
song
lot of
says, it's a monster
heads.
with many heads.
It's very difficult
It's
for us
challenging in these struggles for justice
find
to
justice
find ways
and
when by design
to
there's an absence of
by
easy
design
routes
innocent for the
to
communities. That
protect
was
themselves
that was
from
distractive.
these communities that are affected by mining.
Wanted
And I
to
wanted to
share
share some reflections, some specific things from our Canadian
context, but also
context,
that
which
add
I think add to what Pedro was
what Pedro
mentioning
was
around, these asymmetries that these communities are
every time that we
confronting.
hear a
Every time
community that has
communities
to face
face this
the
transnational mining
mining and
power,
power and
economic
money
and judicial
powers
powers
and
that are
also
also
the security
co-opting security
themes of
forces,
violence
many ways,
as far as the
both in legal forces as well as illegal armed forces that are generating
majority
more
of the
militarization, more forced
militarization
displacement, and more
displacement
killings and disappearances
and the people have to
when
leave
in
the
these communities
territories
that are affected.
I wanted to
And
share
wanted to share some
some of my
reflections from our Canadian
experiences.
context. As Allison mentioned, that's where this foreign investment began, and where Ahora Mineros has its stocks in the stock exchange. Perhaps one of these asymmetries is best represented by the support of foreign governments to prop up the interests of companies like Ahora Minerals, and from a country like Canada that has the slogan of social responsibility, corporate social responsibility, that is totally void of real and effective mechanisms to facilitate justice to communities, especially indigenous communities, and also the way in which they give their backing to the investor class and foreign direct investment to these international companies through free trade agreements like CAFTA, as well as a free trade agreement between Honduras and Canada, in which these companies can take advantage of that, and they often do. So also to remember part of the story of mining in Honduras in the last few years and the strong support of foreign governments up until today. When thinking about the coup in 2009, when in that moment the strong grassroots struggle at the national level, there was really an attempt to change the status quo when it comes to mining. When there was a debate in Congress, there was a law that was trying to prohibit open air or open pit mining and protect communities. And as we saw after the coup, there was very quick action by the United States in terms of supporting that coup government, as well as the Canadian government, which specifically plays a role that is very particular in the mining sector. Around 50% of mining companies in the world are Canadian based, Aura Minerals being one of them. And the Canadian government has a policy of diplomatic intervention in trying to defend mining projects around the world. And we saw how the Canadian government took advantage of the coup, basically use its money from international finance institutions to support the industry and impose a new law regarding mining, which passed in Congress a year after the coup, and is still in the taking place today, which lifted a 9-year ban on mining. And now we're in the first year of this new administration of Xiomara Castro. And as Pedro mentioned, initially there was a declaration that they would prohibit open pit mining and try and find a way out of this extractive model. And the executive quickly backed out of that. And I do think it's possible that these powers that Pedro mentioned, media power, legislative power, power in the executive branch. I think there's also a power that the free trade agreements provide for protection of foreign direct investment and allows them to sue entire countries when they make decisions that affect their profit, their future profits. So I think that it's very probable that Aura Minerales and other companies may have been threatening the administration of Xiomara Castro with a huge lawsuit of hundreds of millions of dollars, if not billions of dollars, just like we're seeing the demand of the Prospera Group, which is a U.S. company, which is suing the government for $10.8 billion because they're trying to revert the law that created the sedes, or charter cities. This concept is kind of privatization of local governments to create a private country inside a country. So this, we understood, was against Honduran sovereignty. So just saying, there's this other asymmetry that Aura Minerals has when they invest outside of their home country. And these asymmetries are propped up by governments like the United States and Canada. And want to mention, as Allison mentioning, the difficulty of finding routes and contribute to these local resistance movements with national and international solidarity in order to win justice, and how difficult it can be in countries like Canada, where we are denouncing these companies that are buying gold from San Andres mine, despite their supposed commitments to human rights and the environment and indigenous peoples. We also need to mention this structural impunity in countries like Canada and the United States, in which it becomes very difficult to sue these companies that are generating human rights violations outside of their home countries. And Canada, in the last couple of years, was named with lots of fanfare this new human rights ombudsman to watch this corporate responsibility. But first, they make this office that doesn't have political independence or independence from the industry, doesn't have authority to investigate, doesn't have transparency, uh, and doesn't have the trust of communities that are trying to find a space to investigate these cases, and mainly just offers mediation and names someone who for 17 years was very involved in gas and oil industries. So this generated a mechanism that helps the Canadian state to wash its hands, but does not help in any way to provide other options for communities, despite many, many years of struggle by grassroots organization, as well as indigenous communities in this country. So just to give an example of how, how countries like Canada and the United States play an important role in this structure of impunity that companies like Aura Minerals enjoy. And it's part of the situation in which we're in today. And it's part of the, one of the ways that these companies have been able to expand their interests in a very strong way all over Latin America. And each time generating processes of dispossession, of displacement, of threats, and all these harms that Jessica mentioned. And we need to stay focused to pressure these buyers of gold from this Aura Minerals mine. We have to insist to generate pressure against Aura and try and open up spaces so there may be a route towards justice. And I think that's where I'll end my intervention. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, Jen.
Thank you, Jen.
Solamente déjenme,
Just let me.
tengo un problema de tecnología. Bueno, ahorita quisiera invitar, bueno, muchísimas gracias, Jen, por contarnos.
I just want to invite Jen. Thank you for contextualizing this international context and understanding the realities that happen in Honduras. And we are closing our different speakers' interventions. We will also have a space for questions. So our next speaker is Victor Fernandez, but also invite you to stay towards the end because there will be some information around how you can contribute towards this struggle. And I will give the word to Victor Fernandez, who is also a lawyer with Movimiento Amplio por la Justicia y la Dignidad. And as I mentioned before, they are currently legally representing the community of the Mayan Chortí community in the case of Azacualpa. So Victor, I don't know if you can speak. And
compañeros, compañeras que nos siguen. Si me habilitas la cámara para usarla.
I don't know, Jalile, if you can.
Creo que dependo de.
Let me.
Puede ser su video porque el anfitrión lo detuvo.
Déjeme ver. Es que estoy intentando.
Si no,
Okay, I'll do it without video if you can't get it. I'm trying, but I can pin it, but I can't. I don't know if we can get some help here.
El anfitrión nos dice, tener detenido mi video. Pero mientras,
While we wait,
puedo empezar a conversar. Si en algún momento
I can
los
start
videos
talking if you turn on
con esta
my desktop. I'll start, but
reflexión
I'll
final,
start
en primer lugar,
with this
quiero
last
agradecer
reflection. I want to thank
desde nuestros dos espacios tenemos
from
un amplio
both of these
potencial
spaces,
y
the
en
White
buscar estudios para la
Broad
comunidad,
Movement for
para la
Justice and the
comunidad
Lawyer's Office
de
for the
Azacualpa,
community, and also the community of Azacualpa. I think it's indispensable, it's very basic to recognize the value
varias decenas de
of
personas que están
the
conectadas
different
al Zoom
people,
para seguir
as people who are connected to us on Zoom that
tengo
are,
el video, creo.
I think I got access.
Ok.
Here I am. Here I am.
Sí, entonces lo primero es el
So
agradecimiento
the first thing I wanted to,
para quienes
my
siguen
gratitude
viéndonos,
towards all of
para
you
nuestra
who are
comunidad
following
que
us,
están siguiendo
what's happening to us here in the
esta
South,
transmisión que
and
nos
those of you who are
trabaja
following us here today
de
on our
Facebook
page on
de
Facebook
Justicia para la
of the
Comunidad y que
Law Office for
en
Dignity
medio de que ya habíamos
that
empezado
started when we
pero
began this forum.
yo quisiera hacer unos énfasis en
I would like to
segunda parte de
emphasize
mí,
a couple of things in this last part
elementos
that
centrales
I get
del tema de hoy
about
que nos
central
convoca,
themes, themes that are
que tienen
have
que ver
brought
con
us here
esta
together,
empresa minera
that have to deal
minera
with
hondurera que
this
tuvo el
group,
accidente
this
en
corporation that operates in the south of Honduras,
esto
but that
realmente estructural de
also
violencia
has a
y
structural
violencia
component of
sistemática que es la otra
violence, violence which is and impunity,
y que
which
tiene
is the other
un montón
characteristic, and that has a
de colores,
number
de matices
of ways to
que
manipulate,
terminan acentuándose
which end up
y normalizándose en la
settling
sociedad
and
que vivimos
becoming a
en estas
normalized in a
sociedades
society like ours,
tan débiles
in a very
como
weak
nuestras. Yo
institutions
recuerdo,
like ours,
compañera Jenny,
but also as our
institucionalidades
Jenny
que
our
son sometidas
was telling
a
us,
fuerza por el imperio,
these are
las
um,
institucionalidades
institutionals that are being
establecidos desde
submitted
lo
by
jurídico
force by other countries that
tienen un
had the
comportamiento distinto y no lo tienen.
they were supposed to act differently and they're
Lo
not.
primero que quisiera
The first thing that I would
un
like
poco
to
desmintiendo de todo lo que las campañas que
get
hacen
rid of the
la
myth
industria minera
that
en este
the
país
mining industry creates in
me
this
parece
country.
culpable
It presents itself as
en
something that is very
necesaria para una sociedad
necessary,
como la nuestra.
indispensable for a society like us. They laugh
Mismo
at the
mientras
needs
estaba
of the
la
people.
transmisión,
And just now, as this transmission started,
estaba verificando
that I was checking
generación
the
de riqueza y de empleo para el país de una
riches
industria como la
that this
minera.
company has been
Siempre, por ejemplo,
collecting from the mining
la
industry.
minera
And always the
no
mining
llega a
industry
producir ni siquiera el
does not
0%
produce
del Producto
1%
Interno Bruto
of
de un
the
país.
internal
Es decir,
product
la
of a
relación
country like
de
Honduras
daños que puede
in
causar
relations
dependiendo
to the
de
dangers
solo
that
a una
this
comunidad como la comunidad de
mining
Azacualpa,
community can do.
donde
Just in this community in Azacualpa, where the
empleos
lives of the
la
people, where the
convivencia pacífica
uh,
entre la gente se ve
co
no tiene ninguna proporción
connection between the
a esta
people,
riqueza que genera
there is
la
no
economía minera como
protection
esta.
what the
Luego,
riches that this
estábamos viendo
creates for a
estamos
community
viendo
like ours.
y
We're
reflexionando
looking
con
at
nuestro
the
compañero Pedro planteaba el
employment,
tema de la
for example,
falta de
like when
empleos que es
Pedro was
terrible
telling us the amount
para
of
una empresa
uh,
como
employment
Minerosa
that
o
a
Refineries.
company like
Ellos
Minosa or
dicen
Aura
que generan más de
Minerals,
20,000
they always
empleos
say they
desde
create
los
more than
exactamente
5,000
560,
jobs.
600 empleos que estableció Pedro con una proporción
But
de
what they actually
organización
are
enorme
creating are
y los
560.
perjuicios que causa. Pero
And
la
this
industria
is
minera
a huge impact in the
según lo
community.
que tenemos aquí en
But
2017
between the times of
a
2017 to 2019,
produce un
the
neto
company
ingreso de
produces the amount of employment is 0.1 to 0.34. And if we want to go by gender of those employments, only 7% are women employees. So we would have nothing. With these facts, we are clearing off this campaign, this horrific that the corporation headquarters is now pushing for Ahora Minerals in Honduras. Another element that I think is important to point out as far as the general role of mining industry, it's more than 500 years of aggressive extractivism, and which took off in the liberal era of the 90s. This fierce extractionism is killing people, but it also has other forms of structural violence, among them subjecting the institutionality, but it also violates the structure of a community like right there called La Unión Copan, in which also the Azacualpa community resides. Think that every time that there is a population that is opposed to mining, and it makes sues the company, that confronts the company, and every time those employees of that company, they vindicate, they demand to be compensated, they stop the work with the of the mine, and then the mines threaten to leave. And after 40 years of working here, stopping the work of the mines translates into stopping the education, because the teachers in those communities are being paid by the mining company. And it also threatens to the health communities, because the mining companies pays for the medical area. And after 40 years, the local and the national governments are on their knees in front of this, what they call development, which is pushed forth by mining. This is a company that makes 100 to 140 million annually, according to their own paperwork. They are still playing with the human rights, the most basic human rights. That is about development of people, and it is not only the company but also the institutionality, the government. So it's both of these acting together. And I think this is the way that we should think about this: is a subjugation of the institutionality of the government, and stepping on the rights of the dignity of the country. It is shameful that a country like Honduras would have allow a corporation like this to do what it's doing, and to laugh at the people, to laugh at the country. Um, Spaces like these, we are moved by this. And I'll be back to that point. But the other end of this that I wanted to say, that this is the structural violence, the subjugation, structuring of the country, but it should be more to be feeling bad for the community of the people that live close by. It's inconceivable at this point in time. I think this is something that was not mentioned before. Aura Minerals, or Minosa, operates 24 hours a day. It explodes dynamite at least once a day in an area which is a few meters from the community. I have not been able to forget during this presentation what Oscar Miranda said, a neighbor from the community there. The richest man, I believe, in the area, he can't stand the mining because they can't sleep. It's the same way nobody can sleep when they have machines working 24 hours a day. And maybe in the evening or during the day, a bomb blast that rattles their homes. It's inconceivable that after all of this time, and now that we have a new administration, hopefully the uh, ministers of this new administration might be here. We invited them, but they need to know what is happening, what this violence is that is stepping on the human rights of the people who have a face, who have a name. And and but it's unbelievable that then took the bodies from our cemetery somewhere, wherever they want. And I want to really emphasize this because the idea of the nexus between us and our relatives, it's something that has to do with our culture. We all have people who have died, who have passed on. These are the connections we have because when we in our culture, when we go to the grave sites, that's where we connect with them. And it's the functionaries of this country, they have made this plan to disconnect the connection, eternal connection that people have with those who are no longer with us. This is what our minerals is doing. And to put this in a proper dimension, it's not worth that $100 million that they make. This connection, this is not in their emotions. So we're talking about the subjugation, the violence, and everything has become normalized. So state violence now, or violence is so much that in the last visit that we made there, and for those of you who are not from Honduras, who don't understand the geography, we're here in San Pedro Sula. We're around 300 or 200 kilometers from the Azacualpa community. It's hard for us to get there. It's very difficult to get there. And when we have been there in these last times, the company, Aura Minerals, has activated act, activated a whole plan of violence to keep us away or to violate the rights of the resistance of anyone who goes there or the people from the community, the Maya Chortí community that tries to use their rights. I want to close my presentation to say that the level of violence that our minerals has been pushing over the last few decades, nobody escapes it. The Catholic Church in the area, which has been labeled a belligerent actor against the mining industry, we didn't hear what's going on with the role of the church. Everybody there is religious, they're Catholic, but the hierarchy of the religious community has been called to be quiet. The National Human Rights Director is now set aside uh, his role. And for you to know, we are a country in human rights crisis, and this is demonstrated by the presence in Honduras for the Commissioner for Human Rights in Honduras. The last visit that we had been with the representative of the Office of the United Nations, and we were the object of violence, of harassment, to the point that only the protection of the High Commissioner of Human Rights prevented it. But then any activity or anybody who takes up the cause against our minerals is now exposed to violence. You can see our social media every time there is something that questions what R is doing. They have a group of people that are working for the company. They're being paid by the company to attack the people who are asking for their basic human rights. So also in this process of subjugating, there's been a majority of organizations that have taken part, which at one point had said they were committed with Azacualpa. They have abandoned the community. Several of these have actually been infiltrated to pass information, have been infiltrated so that they can pass out information to our minerals. So then let's want to close by saying that this process has converted in the last foxhole against our minerals. And we're doing it. We want to give it. We will do it in all fields. And that's why the name of this forum is called Without Borders Against this mining company. And our minerals is worried about this because every time that we condemn one of the people who are in charge, and we talk about them, what they're doing, then they'll change the manager. They have changed all three managers so far. That is their way. So uh, I wanted to invite you to stay with this last part of the forum so that you can commit yourself to militant action against a company like minerals. We're saying here in Honduras, we're going to continue with this process because it is our determination. It's something that we have to do because we have the faces of the people in Azacualpa, in the forest. This are the people who they're going to go to violent mining companies like this. I don't know if there is a company that isn't violent, but this one is very violent. This is a place with no laws, with no controls, and the only people who can balance this are the organizations, the people who commit themselves. And so I celebrate this international participation in because of the broad and notably violent that our minerals is. Sooner or later, I'm sure that I have the conviction that justice and dignity will prevail, the dignity of the country and the people who are give us the opportunity to represent them in Azacualpa and other places. That is my part. Thank you.
Eh, Thank you, compañero, for your words and for contextualizing and showing us the violence that the modus operandi of this company, which is violence and silencing others. And they always escape justice by changing managers, by buying off people, buying votes, getting people to stop speaking out in terms of these violations that are happening in La Unión Copan. So thank you. And right now we will open up the event for questions. But first, I wanted to share these two actions that we have so you can show your solidarity and be a part of this struggle. And I think it's important to highlight that in this struggle, we need to create a broad movement nationally and internationally. And this is the purpose of this forum, is to see, not just be informed, but that you feel the need to mobilize against the actions of this company at the international stage. These mining companies that have their their headquarters are in the US or Canada, and that those governments need to also do something, and we need your solidarity to defeat this mining violence not just struggling at the local level, but also internationally. So we will share these two actions. I will share these in the chat, the links. We have two actions. One of them is a petition that you can sign, demanding that Acai break their relationship with Ahora Minerals. You can sign this as an individual, and I hope you take this action. It's very simple action. I would say you can show your solidarity in this way with our compañeros in Azacualpa. The other action is a letter, a sign-on letter that we are sending to different organizations to to say that they need to break this relationship that they have with Ahora Minerals. We have exposed the violence, the impunity, which is really, I would say it's one of those situations that surprises me that it's not known. It's not something that nationally or internationally we don't know. There's complicity of the media and state entities so that this violence is not shown, even though it is very serious. And this isn't something new. This has been happening for years and years. This company, Minosa, the subsidiary, has been around for 40 years. Now, Ahora Minerals has the mine since 2002, but before that, they had other mines, and there was other companies that did the same kind of damages to the community, to the environment, that were also destroying cemeteries of other communities. So I hope you will feel compelled to join this movement in solidarity and sign this petition and to sign the second action. If you're part of an organization, that you sign on as an organization to generate that pressure. These two refineries that are based
están basadas en Estados Unidos. Entonces, no sé ya si no sé,
if Jessica, if you wanted to say something else, wanted to add some more words or comments. I saw your hand was up.
No, fue sin querer.
Oh, that was on accident.
Tu micrófono está en silencio, Jalila.
Saying I can show you, this is the first petition that you can sign. You can put your name, your last name, your email, your postal code with your country of origin. If you have any other comments, you can add those. And if you're part of an organization, here's the letter that is asking these refineries in the United States to cut their ties with Ahora Minerals. So, please share it with your friends, people you know who might be part of organizations, unions, that they sign this letter. It's very important because we need to generate enough pressure in any way we can. So maybe we can continue on to the Q&A. We are going to answer some of the questions. I'll stop sharing my screen. If all the panelists can turn on their cameras to begin our Q&A section. I know, Jessica, you might not be able to turn your camera on. But Jessica, do you want to mention something now or after our Q&A? Well, I just want to thank the people who are connected and Movimiento Amplio because they've always been with us in our struggle. And as I was mentioning before, Victor, when they come, the company always puts obstacles, but they always are there. They're always helping in our struggle. And thank you to all the organizations and people who are part of this forum for wanting to help us in our struggle. That's it.
Gracias, Jessica.
Thank you, Jessica.
Y gracias por estar acá, ¿verdad?
Thank you for
hablando de la situación
being
que
here
viven.
and sharing your experience in
No
Azacualpa.
sé si queremos empezar,
I don't know if you want to start.
les vaya leyendo.
I can start reading off some of the questions.
¿Cuántas minas haciendo
So one of the
operaciones
questions
hay
is,
en este
how many
momento?
open
No sé
pit
si alguien
mines
sabía
are
eso.
operating in Honduras in this moment?
No tengo el dato, honestamente.
I honestly don't know the number
Pero
at the
eran
top of my head,
las más
but
renombradas.
the two biggest
Esta de
ones
Azacualpa
are
y la
Azacualpa
Guapinol, que
and Guapinol.
ya está operando.
That's also
Pero no
operation.
conozco de otras. Operan otras minas en el sur del país,
There's other mines in the south
donde han habido, por cierto, accidentes fatales.
where there's been fatal accidents,
Lo podemos buscar mientras
but I don't have
continuamos avanzando.
the exact number, but we can
Alguien está
look
preguntando si ha
look it up.
habido una
Someone's asking.
respuesta, como
There's
una
been
respuesta oficial de parte
official
de
response
con
from Aura
las
Minerals
alegaciones de
with
abusos
respect
de derechos humanos.
to these allegations of human rights abuses.
No te escuchamos, Pedro.
We can't hear you, Pedro.
¿Ahora me escuchas?
Can you hear me now?
¿Ahora me escuchas, Yalile?
Sí, sí, sí.
Can you hear me?
Sí, nosotros como organización hemos
As
enviado,
an organization, we've sent
a
letters to
Mendoza,
Mendoza here in Honduras.
recibido requerimientos de
We've also
explicaciones por parte de
asked for
del
information
Estado como Secretaría de
uh,
Derechos Humanos y también
and from
a
institutions like the Human Rights Office,
Comisionada de las Naciones
as
Unidas
well
para los
as
Derechos Humanos
the
acá en Honduras.
UN
Y,
High Commissioner for Human
en este
Rights.
caso hemos tenido,
In one
por
case,
escrito, de forma oficial, alguna
we've
respuesta,
had
donde ellos estén dando
some
explicaciones o
official
alegando, justificaciones
response
para
in
sus
which
actividades,
they've
ni mucho menos dando algún sentido
so they
de por qué se están
haven't
sucediendo
given
estas
us
cuestiones. Siempre se llama
any
el
response
silencio. Ciertamente,
of why they're doing what they're doing or any justification. They
Minerals es
tend
una
to be
organización
silent.
muy
Right
silenciosa,
now, Aura
muy
Minerals
callada
in
y
Honduras is very quiet
no
in general.
tiene mucha palabra a nivel público de forma
They don't
recurrente,
speak
sino lo
publicly.
hace de forma muy puntual
They do it
cuando se anunció el cierre
during
de
specific
vías abiertas
times,
o cuando
like when the
iban a
presidency
haber
announced
reformas a la ley
the
de minería.
ban on open pit
En esos
mining
momentos
or
es
reforms on mining
realmente palabra muy
in
fuerte,
general. That's when they
postura muy fuerte,
make very strong
cuando hay
declarations, and they'll
diputados
have
y otros
wall-to-wall
personajes
media
de la escena
coverage,
pública
and they
muy
have
fuerte.
alliances with public figures,
En Honduras,
which is very strong.
con el dato
And in
del
Honduras,
anterior, las empresas
with the other
así
question
las
that was
empresas
asked,
mineras a cielo abierto
the open pit
España
mines,
tienen en Honduras son
industrial scale,
particularmente
are particularly
acá, la mina de Azacualpa,
the Azacualpa mine in San Andres
que
and
para
Guapinol.
las personas que puedan haber seguido también
Those
el caso
who
de
may
Guapinol,
have been
son
following
minas
the
donde
case of
comparten
Guapinol,
patrones, por ejemplo, en torno
they
a la criminalización
share similar
de
patterns in terms of
haberle
criminalization
torcido la voluntad al gobierno
and
o a sus hijos
of
o en torno a otras circunstancias.
threatening the government to protect from them being closed.
Gracias, Pedro. Bueno, como si una
Thank you, Pedro.
pregunta,
Uh,
pues a nuestras
There's another question
representaciones regionales e internacionales. Me están
to the,
preguntando si han visto
there's a question around,
the Foreign
have you
Corrupt
seen
Practices
an
Act,
agreement
en
called the
contra de las
Foreign Corrupt
empresas
Practices Act
en los Estados Unidos?
against
No sé
the
si Jen
companies or
o
executives
Alison
in the United
quisieran contestar
States?
esa pregunta.
I don't know if Jen or Allison would like to answer that question.
pueden escuchar?
Hey, can you hear me?
Es que se nos fue la luz, la electricidad,
Sorry, but electricity went out,
pero estoy conectado por...
but I'm still
estoy
connected.
conectada. Sí, quería decir dos cosas.
I
Una
want to
es
say two
que,
things.
ah,
One is
una
that,
es que con la pregunta antigua quería mencionar
like
que
the
la
last
compañía sí
question,
emite un
the
informe
company
de sostenibilidad
the company does give
cada año con
a
todos
report of
sus
sustainability
socios comerciales
to
acerca de su
its
respeto al medio
investors
ambiente y
and
todo eso.
stockholders around its
En
corporate
esos
responsibility,
informes
it impacts on
abiertamente mienten.
in
En el
Honduras.
último informe que
And the
hicieron
last report
hablaron
they made, they
de
spoke
la destrucción del cementerio como un
about the
traslado
cemetery as a
que fue
simple
necesario, que fue declarado por el Estado y que
transportation
ellos le hicieron el favor a las comunidades a
of
según
the
ellos
cemetery to another place,
y que fue
which
como
was a
una
favor to the
supervisión de la
community
alta comisionada.
to
Algo que sabemos
move
que
the cemetery,
abiertamente falso.
which is
La
openly
alto
false.
comisionado de las Naciones Unidas
The UN High Commissioner of Human Rights
en ningún
informed
momento
that in no moment
supervisó la destrucción del cementerio, que
did
más que eso han
the
iniciado varias veces
did they
han
supervise the destruction of the
expresado
cemetery,
preocupaciones por las operaciones
and
del
they, on the contrary, have
y que el
denounced this
cementerio
and
fue
shown concern
elegido
over
por
the issue of the
para que se
cemetery,
puedan explotar
and that the
los
cemetery was
minerarios
indeed
con las
destroyed
comunidades.
to be able
Con la
to
historia del
exploit the
Foreign Corrupt
gold.
Practices Act,
It had nothing to do with
sí
supporting the families or
estamos
communities. In terms of the Foreign
explorando
Corrupt Practices
vías
Act, we are exploring different routes
porque la compañía
because
está
the
en los Estados
company
Unidos y
is in the United
sabemos
States and supposedly
la ley puede aplicarse
the
ahí.
law can be
La cosa
applied
con
in
eso
the United
es
States.
que
The thing
aunque
with that
vemos
is,
que hay indicaciones fuertes
although we see
de
there's
que la
strong
compañía
indications
opera
that the
de manera
company is
corrupta,
operating in a
Foreign
corrupt
Practices
way,
Act es una ley
the Foreign Corrupt
tiene,
Practices Act is a
que
law
es muy
that is
narrow,
it's
es
very
decir, que
narrow.
solo se enfoca
So
en
it only
evidencia concreta de
focuses
soborno
on
funcionario del Estado.
evidence of
Pero
bribes
y por
directly
lo menos
given
hay
to a state
indicaciones que puede haber, pero
uh,
estamos
a
explorando
state
esa zona
entity
porque
or a
no
state
hay cosas concretas
agent,
para emitir
and we
una
don't have
sentencia
enough proof to
hasta ahora.
denounce their practices in that way at this point.
Con respecto, bueno, y con respecto
With
también,
respect to,
para respaldar lo que dijo
just
Alison,
to
en verdad,
add to what Allison was saying,
como dijo Alison, mienten
really, as
abiertamente acerca
Allison said,
de
they
verdad,
openly lie about
de sus prácticas. Incluso
about their
dijeron que
practices.
ellos
They
hicieron
also
una
said
labor
that they did
social y
a
responsable,
social
lo hicieron por un
responsible
beneficio, ¿verdad?
benefit,
Extraer los restos y también,
the
¿verdad? Y
extraction
destruir
of the
el cementerio
remains and destroy the cemetery
comunitario con más de 200 años de antigüedad.
that was over 200 years old.
Que
They
ellos habían
said
hecho más bien algo a
they
favor
had
de las
done
comunidades
a
porque
community service
cementerio. Entonces,
because that was
ellos
going to fall
abiertamente mienten
apart or
y
was
no
going
sé si en
to
algún momento
cause a
reconocen,
landslide.
¿verdad?
So they lie
Y
openly.
hablan de
They don't
las
recognize
violaciones a los derechos
any
humanos.
harm or talk about
Bueno,
human rights
una otra
violations.
pregunta, bueno, hay
As
varias
last
preguntas,
question, there's
pero
there's a
una otra
couple more
pregunta que
questions.
hicieron es si han
There's another
escuchado de
question.
negociaciones
If have you heard of new
para acabar con el cerro
concessions?
Guazapa cerca de San Agustín.
Some people have
¿Verdad? Si
mentioned
hay
Cerro Quetzal
negociaciones
or
para
Cerro
acabar con esa zona,
Guazapa, that's
si podrían hablar
near
un
San
poco más al
Agustin
respecto.
Copan. So could you speak a bit about other concessions that may be granted?
Nosotros particularmente no tenemos
So we don't have information
o requerimiento de
or
comunidades
any
estén amenazadas por concesiones.
denouncements from communities about these new concessions.
Pido disculpas porque es que acá se fue la energía, entonces
Sorry,
estoy como
because the light went out here, so I'm in the dark.
ahora
Right now,
lo que sí
what I do see as a threat from the operations of Aura Minerals is that if you see geographically, if you don't know the zone, Aura Minerals operated beneath the cemetery. Now they're on the cemetery and they're going up the mountain. What's in the cemetery is Azacualpa, and La Cevita is above that, which is where there's water resources, not just from La Cevita, but many communities in the area. So our work, what we are facing is a possible expansion of the company's operations. In terms of La Cevita, they are doing without authorization. They are exploring the zone, and that's activating the local resistance, which they've already trying to give them benefits to community leaders, things that are miserable. They're trying to give them a community center, which might be important to some communities who don't have it, but it's insignificant in comparison to the harm that will be done. But in the area, we don't know of any other mines operating other than Aura Minerals in this area. Bueno, thank you very much to all the panelists. Thank you for your participation. Thank you to everyone who joined us today. I will say and remind you that we want you to feel moved to become a part of this struggle and speak out against not just this mining violence in Azacualpa, but in the entire country, which, like Victor says, this company operates with violence, with impunity, and does whatever it wants. So if there's no other questions, thank you, everyone. And thank you to every single one of you for participating in this event. Thank you very much.
Gracias, adiós.
Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias. Buenas tardes.
Thank you. Good night.